Let me tell you a story about vengeance, redemption, and the shadows that refuse to stay buried. There was a man who ruled the darkness itself, not the darkness of evil, mind you, but the darkness where society's outcasts found refuge, where the forgotten made their kingdoms, where power flowed through channels the sunlit world pretended didn't exist. They called him the Underworld King, and his name was Lin Wuya. For years, he had built an empire in the shadows, commanding respect and fear in equal measure, his word becoming law in places where conventional law dared not tread. But every king has an origin, and his began in blood and ashes. One night, without warning, without mercy, his family was slaughtered, not in the underworld where violence was expected, but in their ancestral home. In the world of light and respectability they had tried to maintain. His parents, his siblings, even the servants who had raised him since childhood all cut down in a single brutal night. The massacre was thorough, calculated, designed to erase not just lives but an entire lineage. Lin Wuya had been away that night, building his dark empire, thinking his success in the shadows could protect those he loved in the light. He returned to find only corpses and questions. The authorities investigated half-heartedly, declaring it a random attack, closing the case with suspicious speed. But he knew better. Random attacks don't eliminate entire bloodlines with surgical precision. Random attacks don't leave behind signs of professional killers who knew exactly where everyone would be. So he vanished from the underworld, letting others believe he had gone mad with grief or died in some forgotten alley. But Lin Wuya was hunting, following threads so faint they were nearly invisible, piecing together a conspiracy that reached higher and deeper than he'd imagined. His investigation led him through labyrinths of corruption, through webs of power that connected legitimate businesses to criminal enterprises, through secret societies that had existed for centuries, and everywhere he turned, he found walls of silence, witnesses who disappeared, evidence that burned before he could reach it. But he wasn't alone in this dark journey. 7 women entered his life, not by chance but by fate's design. Each possessed extraordinary abilities. Each carried their own shadows, their own reasons for existing in the margins between light and dark. The first was a master of information, a woman who could disappear into crowds and extract secrets from the air itself. She had built networks of informants across every level of society, from street vendors to corporate boardrooms. She approached him because his family's massacre connected to something larger she'd been tracking, a pattern of eliminations that spanned decades. Together, they began mapping the invisible empire that had ordered his family's death. The second was a warrior, trained in forgotten martial arts, her body a weapon honed through years of discipline. She had her own vendetta against the same dark forces. Having lost her master to a similar assassination, she taught him that vengeance required more than anger. It required precision, patience, and the willingness to become sharper than those who wielded death so casually. The third was a doctor who walked between worlds, healing criminals the hospitals wouldn't touch, treating wounds that couldn't be explained to authorities. She had seen the aftermath of the dark power's work, had sewn together the victims who survived, had closed the eyes of those who didn't. She joined him because she was tired of only treating symptoms. She wanted to cut out the disease itself. The fourth was a hacker, a ghost in the digital realm, capable of turning technology into both weapon and shield. She could erase his presence from surveillance, could forge identities, could unlock secrets buried in encrypted files. She had discovered that her own parents' accidental deaths years ago bore the same signatures as his family's massacre. The conspiracy was older and wider than either of them had known. The fifth was a thief, elegant and untouchable, who could infiltrate any location, bypass any security, acquire any object. She stole not for wealth, but for the thrill of exposing the powerful's hidden shames. She brought him evidence from vaults and safes, from private collections and secret archives, pieces of the puzzle locked away in places normal investigators could never reach. The sixth was a former assassin, retired from a life of killing, haunted by the faces of those she'd eliminated. She recognized the methods used in his family's massacre because she had been trained in similar techniques. She knew the organizations that employed such killers, knew their protocols, their signatures, their weaknesses. She joined him seeking redemption, hoping that preventing future massacres might balance the scales of her own blood-stained past. The seventh was a mystic, someone who understood that not all power existed in the material world. She read energies others couldn't perceive, sensed connections invisible to normal sight, warned of dangers that hadn't yet manifested. She had dreamed of his family's massacre before it happened, had woken screaming with visions of blood and fire, and had been searching for him ever since, knowing that his survival meant the prophecy was incomplete, that the story wasn't finished. Together, these seven extraordinary women became his allies, his protectors, his family in the absence of the one stolen from him, and he, in turn, used every skill he'd developed in the underworld to shield them from the dangers that stalked their investigation. As they dug deeper, the truth emerged like a monster from dark water. His family hadn't been random victims. They had been guardians of a secret, keepers of knowledge about the true power structure controlling both the legitimate world and the underworld. His bloodline had been eliminated to silence that knowledge forever, but they had made one mistake. They had let Lin Wu alive, and now, with seven brilliant women at his side, each bringing skills that complemented his own, he was coming for them, not with the chaotic rage of personal vendetta, but with the calculated precision of someone who had mastered darkness itself. The investigation transformed into a war fought in shadows and silence. Every revelation brought them closer to the heart of the conspiracy, to the faces behind the massacre, to the moment when vengeance and justice would finally converge. This is the story of how the underworld king returned, not to reclaim his throne, but to burn down the empires built on his family's graves, and how seven extraordinary women helped him discover that sometimes the only way to honor the dead is to protect the living from the same fate. The shadows have memory, the darkness keeps its promises, and some debts can only be paid in the complete destruction of those who thought themselves untouchable.